This is the reading is from Censored number 99, entitled Doom and Gloom Politics by William J. Eisenman, Ph.D. Right-wing counterfeit Christians had a field day with the results of the 2006 midterm elections and the Democrats' sweep of the House, because a huge majority of Americans cast off their blinders and swept Democrats into office to try to save our country. The religious nuts bellowed that the Democrats will seal America's doom. The absurd claim of these right-wing Republican counterfeit Christians was that Democrats are weak on prosecuting George W. Bush's war on terror. Their ridiculous claim was that Democrats want to cut and run. These people still believe that selected President George W. Bush was a man of God instead of a venal corporate lackey who wouldn't know the God of the Bible if he tripped over him. To these misguided fools, George W. Bush had a stovepipe to God. Many of these right-wing counterfeit Christians actually revered George W. Bush. They called the November elections a disaster for America. Excuse me. One has to ask, excuse me, where these people had been for the last 6 years. That is the 6 years of the Bush administration. These people have actually believed, that George W. Bush's war in Iraq is a war on terrorism. It is not. As a result of an over 40-year propaganda war on Democrats and liberals, these right-wing Republican counterfeit Christians have nothing but disdain for Democrats and liberals. Because liberals try to be fair, they are called immoral, secular humanists. It is claimed that Democrats are anti-war and can't save America from its enemies. But who are America's enemies? One name comes to mind: Osama bin Laden, who was in Afghanistan, not Iraq. Saddam Hussein was contained and neutered militarily. There were no bin Laden cohorts in Iraq before Bush's invasion. George W. Bush lied us into an illegal war in Iraq. Also, the Congress to this day has not declared the military action in Iraq a war. The God of the Bible does not promote war. War is chaos and confusion, and these are traits of Satan. War is a waste of morals, a waste of blood, and a waste of a country's treasure. The God of the Bible did not whisper into George W. Bush's ear. The devil did. None of this is recognized by those vain right-wing Republican counterfeit Christians, those fake protectors of America. Right-wing religious nuts claim Democrats lack the will to fight this country's enemies. But isn't it a lack of will and much more to miscalculate the material and human resources of this country in an undeclared, cooked intelligence, imaginary war on terrorism? Isn't it a lack of will and pure stupidity and incompetence to place this country's military in the midst of a civil war? Isn't it a lack of will and blatant venality to allow corruption and incompetent privatization to hurt our military? Isn't it a lack of will and gross incompetence when one looks at the length and cost of George Bush's fiasco in Iraq? Surge and all. It has lasted longer than World War II and cost more. For the 8 years of the Bush administration, the Republicans in the Senate and the House refused to debate any of these problems, these failed policies, these devil-influenced policies. Right-wing religious leaders and writers gave Bush a pass at not being successful in Iraq because at least he used some measure of force. These people failed to get the point that what force Bush used was used wrongly and in the wrong country, the wrong target. The force Bush used was wasted energy, money, and lives. Republican counterfeit Christians claimed wrongly that Democrats have no plan to fight the enemies of our country. Actually, the Democrats had several plans, something the Bush administration never had when it invaded Iraq. The Bush administration, several years after 9/11, had no plan to fight terrorism. All their plans to fight terrorism had been directed at innocent Americans. George W. Bush and his gang of thieves really were petty despots who were trying to make the president into a dictator. Al-Qaeda did not rejoice with the resignation of the incompetent Donald Rumsfeld. The religious followers of George W. Bush preached that it is because of the bumbling of the Bush administration that we haven't been hit again, and that Democrats would be soft on radical Islam. How soft on radical Islam was it to pull our troops out of Afghanistan, where Osama bin Laden was, and invade Iraq? The terrorists were in Afghanistan, not in Iraq. The Republican religious nuts were spreading propaganda that Democrats, especially liberals, coddle terrorists. It was a lie. The religious right and morally bankrupt neocons refused to accept the irrefutable truth that George W. Bush was an incompetent leader and that his administration was a joke, a freak show. Fact was that George W. Bush was a man, a truly immoral man. His supposed Christian administration had blocked all oversight and investigation into corruption and war profiteering. These functions of Congress and the people are called internal crisis and friction by the religious enablers of George W. Bush's corrupt and immoral administration. More religious right propaganda claimed that Democrats have a history of inept and weak foreign policy. Was Ronald Reagan a Democrat? He was extremely weak and inept at foreign policy, and he even cut and ran from terrorists in Lebanon. The counterfeit Christians claimed that liberals policies are vile. They are vile beliefs. These religious pretenders seem to experience a senior moment concerning all the vileness going on in Washington during those years of the Bush administration. The word vile means wicked, ungodly, and describes Republicans of those years perfectly. If these counterfeit Christians actually understood biblical prophecy, they would have seen that Bush and the Republicans had brought about a decaying and withering of America and its standing in the world and at home, a rotting at the core. Bush and the Republicans exemplified the churl, the fraud, deceit, and stinginess that have gripped much of America. The family values touted by Republicans are fake. These people are, in fact, immoral and are religious hypocrites. The Bible makes it clear that these leaders work iniquity. They are lawless. The Republican religious supporters of George W. Bush defy God's laws and truths. They are spiritually empty. Isaiah 32, verses 5 through 8. It is godly beliefs that are at the core of the true liberal. The true liberal has noble values, and he is upright and wholesome. The Republican enablers of George W. Bush were anything but noble. The Republican supporters of the George Bush administration had proven themselves to be lawless and approving of corruption. They supported an authoritarian and despotic pretend president. These people have caused America's moral crisis to worsen by having no interest in the truth. Their vile beliefs and values have contaminated and made of no value our databases of knowledge. They have politicized truth. They are preoccupied with lascivious behaviors like gaining wealth at another's expense. They are crass materialists. Republican hypocrites talk about supporting the troops while they cut funding to the Veterans Administration. They shun oversight to make sure our troops have the best equipment, food, and water. The conservative privatizing of the military has spawned only corruption, as it always has. These self-serving Republicans flout history. They lack leadership qualities. Republicans during the Bush administration were yes men and followed an evil influenced president. This poor leadership for America is a curse from the God of the Bible, and it is prophesied to result in the destruction of America. These Republican counterfeit Christians are, contrary to their boasts, actually anti-God, and their beliefs are vile. In prophecy, the God of the Bible is referring to America in Isaiah 1:4, where he says, "Ah, sinful nation, a people a people laden with iniquity, a seed of evildoers, children that are corrupt. They have forsaken the Lord. They have provoked the Holy One of Israel into anger. They are gone away backward. The Republicans, because they practice party over the nation and the people, are grave sinners and destroyers of America. These grave sinners are tearing America apart. Isaiah 1 verse 5 says, leaders are sick. Our leaders are sick. The head is sick and the heart is faint. God is referring to America in Leviticus 26 verse 19 when he warns that he will break America's pride in her power and take away our courage to stand up to enemies. Today, Americans don't even know who the true enemy is, and they are unaware of the enemies within, those who supported the George W. Bush despotic administration. The Bush administration took its eyes off our true enemies, and they sabotaged and made worthless our intelligence gathering capabilities. They have misused and abused America's massive military and financial power against a strawman enemy and the American people. Saddam Hussein was contained and no threat at all to America. Bush's war on terror was a fake. Congress has the constitutional obligation to declare war. Congress has not, to this day, done so. Also, one cannot wage war on a feeling. That is terror. The war on terrorism after 9/11 was in Afghanistan. That was where Osama bin Laden was. The invasion and occupation of Iraq brought terrorists and civil war to the country. Winston Churchill wrote, quote, "The history of the human race is war." But God doesn't want his people warring. Jesus said to love your enemies. Yet the Republican religious right are rabid warmongers. They are unaware of the Bible prophecy that indicates America won its last war with World War II. These religious pretenders want to spill the blood of our soldiers in a futile, privatized, resource-grabbing racket. War is a racket, and the invasion of Iraq fits this definition perfectly. The corrupt Bush administration lied to the Congress, and we, the people, in preparing for war in Iraq. George W. Bush, who right-wing counterfeit Christians refer to as a man of God, used the devil's tool, lying, in order to go to war. Satan is the father of the lie, and the voice George W. Bush heard telling him to invade Iraq was, according to the Christian frame of reference, the voice of Satan. To correct Jerry Falwell, who is now deceased, Satan didn't spawn the idea of global warming, but Satan did spawn George W. Bush's inept war in Iraq. Right-wing religionists believe that the electing of a weak Democrat in November paved the way for a woman to be elected president. But what's wrong with that, as the fact that Ronald Reagan and George W. Bush proves that if they can govern, anyone can? Hosea 5, verses 5 and 9, speaks of a time in the latter days when the United States won't be able to help the state of Israel or Great Britain, and they will turn to the real enemy of all three, the last revival of the Holy Roman Empire, the beast. America will be too weak and destroyed internally to help, and all three will fall about the same time. They all experience a geopolitical decline. The corrupt Bush administration and its Republican and Democrat enablers have drained America of its wealth, will, truth, and its moral compass, the blood of its soldiers, and the love of country once felt by the families of the fallen soldiers. Evangelicals want a Christian morality to be the ruling ethos of the United States, and they wonder why Americans should fear fundamentalists instead of radical Islam. Actually, we should fear both of them, as they are both right-wing conservative ideals that are dangerous to our freedoms and our Constitution. Churches today are interested in entertainment, building up people's self-esteem, and the filling of seats. They're not interested in truth, only falsehood and fables. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 3 to 4, Isaiah 30, 9 through 10. About 66% of Americans think of divorce as acceptable. But fundamentalists believe that couples who have lost it should remain together to torture each other and make each other's lives miserable. Matthew 5, verse 31 through 32, Matthew 19, verses 4 through 6, Mark 3, verses 24 and 25. Right-wing Republican religionists call Democrats immoral simply because Democrats refuse to practice discrimination in the name of unproven religious beliefs. Right-wing religious despots regard pornography as immoral, but remain quiet concerning all the financial and political corruption that was championed by the Bush administration. But Isaiah 1, verse 6 condemns them all. Genesis 6, verse 11 states that the people in Noah's time were violent, corrupt, and immoral, much like those in the Bush administration. Their ways were the ways of destruction and misery. They had no fear of God. Romans 3, verse 18. In the instance of the Bush administration, the misery and destruction and the broken lives, as well as the suffering, is being done by our broken, privatized, dependent military, the poor and the middle class, the wrongly imprisoned and tortured, the innocent. And in all of this cacophony of perversion is lost the call of reason. Where is Osama bin Laden? The end.
Hi, this is William Morrow. Are you one of those people who join a health club, and after they have your big, overpriced annual membership, you notice that you're on your own with little or no results even after all the promises? Then the website Personal Trainer is for you.
Thank you very much, William H. Morrow III.
So you lost another argument with a conservative, right-wing Republican. He talked over you. He screamed and yelled. He brought out the Bible. He thumped it. He quoted scripture to you. You were lost because you came at him with facts. Nothing but facts. And you expected that would That would make you look good. That would make you win the argument, but it didn't. You know why you lost the argument? You know why you're going to lose your next argument? Because you don't read Censored. Censored, the 30-year-old newsletter that shows you how to defeat a conservative. Read Censored, and you'll have all the ammunition you need. Every time you get into an argument with a right-wing conservative, so-called Christian. Censored. That's all you need. Read it and defeat a conservative.
Greetings, listeners. Let me speak to you for a moment about the foundation of our entire organization, Newsletters Censored. It was founded by our mentor, the Reverend Dr. William J. Eisenman, in 1977. It discusses the 5 taboos of American life: politics, religion, health, human sexuality, and child rearing. You won't find anything like this in the mainstream media and the press. It reveals the kind of truth that most people are afraid to hear. Can you handle it? We are living in the end times, so in order to defeat a conservative and save America, you need Newsletters Censored. Go to www.newslettercensored.com, click on the printable order form page, and with your gift to support this work, get your free annual subscription. This is James P. Madonna of Megalife 21, the hardest hitting internet talk radio station on the planet.